Welcome to the Spherity podcast season Product Passport Pioneers. My name is Susanne Guth-Orlowski and I'm Chief Innovation and Solutions Officer of Spherity. Today we're speaking to Andreas Weiss. He is Head of Digital Business Models at the ECO Association. Welcome, Andreas.
Welcome, Susanne. Thanks for the invitation.
In our view, the Gaia-X technologies have a potential to implement the digital product passport, and Andreas here is in the driver's seat of many activities around Gaia-X. Gaia-X is also the basis of CatenaX, and we already had that discussed in a podcast with Adrian von Mühlenen. CatenaX is an initiative of the automotive industry that aimed at building the digital product passport for batteries. Just to give this a little bit of a setting, why we invited Andreas to this podcast season. But Andreas, before we go in all these details of Gaia-X and CatenaX, please give us an idea about your previous professional life. When I looked into your LinkedIn profile, I saw a lot of cloud coming up. So maybe you want to elaborate a little bit on where you're coming from.
Okay. Well, my journey with the IT sector started already a long time before the cloud, because I'm working in the IT domain since 40 years, developed my first commercial software on a PC cloud, and had the challenge to work with acoustic couplers as well. So this is a long journey already. It's an exciting journey. But as you rightly said, the cloud business came to my attention in 2008, and since 2009, I'm managing the German branch of Eurocloud, which is directly associated with the ECO Association of the Internet Industry. And then in 2018, I started a new business unit within ECO for digital business models. And the goal is to show the added value by using modern digital services, mainly in the area of artificial intelligence, IoT, and blockchain. So all these smart concepts. Just to let you know, also ECO is shareholder of GaiaX, which is known as the largest commercial internet exchange by volume in Frankfurt. Offerings of neutral internet exchanges across over the world. So we are mainly related to all these digital infrastructure provisioning, starting from interconnection services, ISPs, data center, cloud. So this is where I'm coming from, and to turn it then into the different view of how to make use of such infrastructures by applying emerging digital service concepts.
At ECO and with regards to Gaia-X, what are your responsibilities there today?
Well, I'm I've been with the concept of Gaia-X before it has been named Gaia-X. So the initiation was done by the Platform Industry 4.0 in Germany. It was not a provider-driven initiative, it was a demand-driven initiative.
And Platform 4.0, can you also please mention a few words for the listener?
Is how to digitize well-known industrial processes and environments, building digital twins of the internal shop floor environments, talking about standardization, data exchange internally and to some extent also externally, and improve the capabilities of the typical hardware-related production processes and how to link them with digital services and enhance them. And so these are the conceptual approaches. One of the outcomes is the asset administration shell, which is such a digital twin concept. And they understood that on one side, we have a lot of data internally into our production processes, which can be used for example, AI processing, predictive maintenance, joint collaboration, and all these things. But no one was willing to share data to other parties without appropriate guarantees about potential misuse of such data, because they consider also the data out of these processes as intellectual property.
Of course.
This was the driver to consider a concept like Gaia-X, which is on a more abstract layer, the definition of federated data infrastructure ecosystems.
Yeah, we have to speak about that as well and make the listener understand it. Yeah, maybe that brings me to this. Can you explain Gaia-X in a few sentences, very high level at the moment, maybe at the moment, so that a non-technical person also understands it?
Okay. With a disclaimer, if you ask 20 people about Gaia-X, you will get 20 different answers, at least. I will provide the initial idea of Gaia-X and how it should be evolved. So, as I mentioned already, data is a key asset in this conceptual thing. And we need to consider one aspect, which is data availability. So how to get hold of data in a easy and resilient way. So, which leads us to the conceptual idea we need to formally describe data assets and data services, how to opt in, and how to negotiate the usage of such data between two parties. Then in general, where are we going to manage such data? And we should be smarter than just distribute data from the edge into hyperscaler data centers and then try to make use out of it. We need a more decentralized approach. Just consider the amount of data. We are talking about terabytes, petabytes. And if you just want to transfer them through the internet or even by other means through the central data centers, this will cause a major cost level and also constraints in terms of bandwidth and so on. So
and probably also companies do not trust central databases too often. They don't want to put their data there, especially not confidential data. I guess that's also one of the things that we have to consider and that Gaia-X is addressing.
Right. And I think the key objective, and this should be in the first place, is to drive innovation. I'm saying this because at a certain point, people are putting this additional requirement of so-called digital sovereignty on top of it, which triggers the discussion around who owns the data center, what is the balance between non-EU and EU providers, and are we still in a conceptual approach to consider GDPR requirements and other regulation, which is, of course, a relevant and necessary discussion. But before we go there, we should really keep this innovation term in the first place and have a more open concept in this sense, and just showcase how we can orchestrate such scenarios from the edge to the cloud with services which are appropriate in the various entities, and then guarantee that we achieve the needed compliance level or trust level, or, as you said, the means to protect data against misuse or agreed disclosure to other parties. So these are the things we need to address from the conceptual state, and then we can consider how we can be more sovereign in the digital space.
And the sovereignty, maybe we can also pick up with a few more sentences. The original concept probably was the self-sovereign identity, which was more coming from a human sector, where humans have their certifications, information that they produce, and to keep them by themselves and keep their data under control before they show them to others and not upload them to central data spaces. And I think this is where this is coming from. Now, in the Gaia-X concept, we have the same concept, not for human identities, but for company identities, or maybe also for human identities, but also for company identities. So for the company identity, what does that mean, to keep control or sovereignty over that data? Can you maybe elaborate with a few sentences about that as well?
Well, the way how we finally made the conclusion that the SSI concept is appropriate for the objectives of Gaia-X was more that we identified the scenarios which went good and which didn't went good. For example, all the ideas we saw in the healthcare sector to have a very centralized identifier and large intermediate databases is inflexible, costly, and is more a delay in the journey to adopt digital services. So what we've seen when we then finally analyzed the requirements, we said, first of all, it must be a concept which works decentralized. We need to have a balanced approach. We don't want to replicate the well-known platform concepts, so more the ecosystem concept, and no one should be in the driver's seat to control any identities. And this was one of the considerations, but what is even more interesting is when we talk about the exchange of data and in the first place, we need to have a good digital identification. Who are the parties? And if necessary, they should be linked up to legal identity proofs. Because when we exchange data, for example, and we want to keep the term of data sovereignty, we need to address also the question about liability and what has been agreed between two parties, which is typically the topic of smart contracting. And so this is more the organizational enforcement of data sovereignty. We agreed on certain definitions, and this is captured in a smart contract. And if someone is working against these agreements, they should be liable. It should be clear that this will have some consequences. So, and therefore we need all these other SSI conceptual ideas like verifiable credentials, verifiable presentations, and also means to establish trust over ecosystems. And we said SSI is a good thing. DID is a very good thing. You have to understand that there is a multitude of implementation methods, and this has to be addressed as well. But from the conceptual approach, and even the idea of coming back to this personal thing, the selective and conditional disclosure of information is also a very smart way to interact in such digital ecosystems.
Absolutely. So we have Gaia-X as a concept, or a security concept, also I think on top of just general cloud storage, such as kind of Amazon or Open Telecom cloud services. So for me, it's a trust concept on top of it. And we have, as you said, the limited disclosure of information of a company, of a human being, in the exchange of other entities, of other companies that we can identify and can relate to something in the non-digital world, such as kind of the registration of a company at the Chamber of Commerce, for example, that I have in the non-digital world and connected to something like this. And so kind of this is how the trust is being established. Now, let's talk about the federations a little bit. What are the federations, or the concept of federations in Gaia-X, and which federations do we have today? Maybe which ones are coming up, And maybe can you explain a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's on one side, it's pretty simple. We are living in federated states. Even in Germany, we have 16 federated states. We have 17 data privacy authorities, which is a burden by itself, but this is part of the game. Europe is federated, and which means we are always looking for a balance of self-determination by each federation, which is still embedded into a kind of joint understanding and joint governance where applicable. So this is simply said the key idea of federations. So, and in our terms and our view, federations are seen as groups which can be seen by domains or industry players or users or healthcare, hospitals, whatever, who are agreeing to work jointly on certain business or value cases, which implies also the use of data between these parties. So, which leads then to the assumption that we need a kind of core governance, which should apply for any of such ecosystems. But they need the flexibility to put their own additional governance on top, or if necessary, for example, a regulation to override or supersede other governance aspects if they are not appropriate.
When you talk about governance, explain that to the listener, please. What does a governance include?
Yeah, within Gaia-X, for example, we have a chapter for policies and rules. So how to behave in such joint ecosystems in terms of respect to each others, in terms of guarantee any or avoid any misuse of information which are shared amongst each parties, which is of course more kind of agreement, and typically when you're in an association, which is also a multi-stakeholder group, you have your article of association, which is more a formal procedure. But before we go into this direction, we should have a clear understanding about some rules. For example, transparency. So that each party is committed if they describe, for example, computing services, cloud services, they should follow rules in terms of being precise and provide appropriate information, which can be supported by third-party evidence if needed, like certification. So it's more to build a kind of trust environment where parties agree on common standards, on common principles.
And processes, whom to trust.
Sorry.
Yeah, sorry as well. No, I just wanted to add also processes are part of the trust framework or the governance, and also kind of the trusted parties in there that may certify certain things. You mentioned the auditors. So in the trust framework, I think we usually have the trust lists of companies that I trust as third party is such things. I think I just wanted to add to the governance part. So coming back to the federations, one of the federations is, for example, CatenaX. What do they do, and how does that relate to Gaia-X?
Okay, well, as you said, rightly said, CatenaX is one of these blueprints for a federation. So the mission of CatenaX is to enable the digital flow of information across the entire supply chain. And by this, the CatenaX data ecosystem will increase the resilience and flexibility of supply chains. Well, this is a nice statement, but which is more impressive, who are the actors within CatenaX? Because these are large companies who are acting in direct competition. But even they agreed to work jointly together on common goals like sustainability, circular economy, modular production, quality and capacity management, up to manufacturing as a service, because they have the same challenges.
Yeah.
So some people are naming this as kind of competition, so which is a collaboration and competition at the same time.
Yes.
Just considering that we have BMW and Volkswagen and Ford and other major companies. And this is the interesting thing, they understood. If we try to establish such ecosystems by our own, with our OEMs and suppliers, they might have even the enforcement to do so, but at a certain point, the burden on the OEMs will be too much, and they will be very reluctant to step into such an ecosystem approach by each of the parties. This will lead then to different technology stacks, and they have to do always the same, but one in the flavor for BMW, one in the flavor for Mercedes. So there's the expectation to have some standardized approach up front, and to decouple this, let me say, customer-supplier relationship by such a more neutral entity, which is then also entitled to take care about the governance of data, which will be exchanged between these parties. And this is the key idea behind it. It is very impressive. I think they are targeting up to 6,000 to 8,000 OEMs on the worldwide base, because automotive supply chains are on a worldwide level. Sure. And one of the triggers is, as I think I told it already to some of the sessions, this industry faced situations where a 50-cent microchip is the trigger to release a 100,000 euro car or not. So there is a mismatch between products which are delayed due to circumstances which are unforeseen, and by the transparency by data, they have the expectation that they can manage such situation in kind of preemptive mode, so that they identify such risks much earlier and can react accordingly.
And establish some better resilience as we have today in the industries. One other federation, for example, is Manufacturing X. Maybe can you say a few words about that one, or maybe another federation that are emerging that I maybe don't know?
Precisely, Manufacturing X is a federation of federations, so it's more CatenaX by 10. So Manufacturing X is the idea which has been suggested to the German Parliament recently to allow a full enhancement of all production-related activities in various domains. So this is more a multi-domain approach to digitize the different production areas and entities, and by this to overcome certain domain constraints between industry, like chemical industry, consumer goods, retail, whatever, because there are a lot of cross dependencies which are not yet full visible, but they are there. And with Manufacturing X, the idea is to replicate the conceptual approach of CatenaX into other domains and interconnect them based on same concepts, same standards, and same technology considerations, which will hopefully help to expedite the adoption of digital services and a better combination of well-known production processes with digital services. And this is the overall idea of Manufacturing X, and the fine concept is still under construction, but we had already a workshop this by mid of January to bring all the key stakeholders together and to work on towards joint concepts.
And I think that's such a beautiful thing, that we really need to understand that the technology that we have here at Gaia-X has the potential to work across industries. If you're a manufacturer of wood, or you know, you provide wood material, then you provide it into so many different industries. And the beauty that we have here, the potential that we have here, is that you can provide it or to the automotive industry, but also to furnitures, maybe even also to textiles industry and so forth, and work with the same technologies even across industries. And I think that's kind of the beauty and the potential that this technology has, that we're aiming for, to make the world a little bit easier, especially the manufacturing world, and exchange data between all the parties in there, exchange data between all the supply chain actors in all those different sectors. So that's kind of the idea that we're aiming at. Now, so CatenaX is currently trying to build parts of the digital product passport with Gaia-X technology, based on Gaia-X technologies and other technologies. What do you think is needed really to build a digital product passport with the Gaia-X out of the box means that we have, or what is being used here?
First of all, I need to state CatenaX has not yet made a certain technology decision how to deal with the digital product passport, but we can showcase that the conceptual approach within Gaia-X is a good way to go into this direction due to a lot of functional requirements which arises around the digital product pass. The background here is that one aspect we already discussed is this usage of digital identities. Can be applied to organizations, we say participants in Gaia-X, or individuals like principals in Gaia-X, but most likely in the future also for machines, components, services, whatever. I think the concept allows a lot of implementations in this various dimensions. Then the second part is, and this was the initial challenge in Gaia-X, is how to describe complex digital services. And therefore, we made decisions to use serializable data concepts, linked data concepts, verifiable credentials, and all these things, which leads to the opportunities to build up knowledge graphs, have a full view on interconnected services. Just simply, if you consider an AI service, it is not just one AI service. It's a multitude of different services which are composed together. And if you want to make any kind of GDPR assessment, you need to follow all the rules of the data. Where are potential problems which might impact my level of GDPR compliance? So these are technologies. This is more from the technology side, using JSON-LD and all these things, a set of W3C standards, NoSQL databases, which leads then to a pattern which is fully comparable to the requirements we can see in the DPP area. Just from the presentation layer, so how to represent the information on a digital framework, but then also how to establish smart concepts in terms of distributed information. Because we had such a discussion already with the EU Commission. From a regulatory perspective, they would like to see a full control, and therefore they need to be aware of such information, and they would like to get hold of such information, which is then, in the worst case, again, a full centralized approach where you have to put all your product passes into one entity, and even worse, then each of these entities who are interested about the content of digital product passes, like customs or product safety or others, they might even replicate again and again. And this will work completely against the dynamic of such information. And what we would like to see, that we have a conceptual approach where we clearly know who owns which claim, so who is responsible for which statement. Can we verify them in a decentralized way, and can we just link them and take a snapshot when needed according to certain use cases? And then we are back in this decentralized conceptual approach, which is fully aligned with the Gaia-X concept in terms of distributed services, distributed descriptions, and hopefully at least we can showcase how it works in the Gaia-X world. And we have already a commitment on the technology considerations. And all these players who are now targeted with the requirements of the regulation of DPP are also engaged in the Gaia-X evolution. So
absolutely,
this will bring us to a level of synergies we might use here.
Yeah. When we look at the federation services, where Spherity was also participating in building them, we today have an organizational credential manager, we have a personal credential manager. What we do not have is kind of a product credential manager or a machine credential manager. Is that something that we need to look at actually to fulfill those digital product passport concepts? Because we need a machine identity or product identity that we can put credentials on.
Yeah, yes and no. As a DPP is in the first place a description of an existing environment, you will always have a kind of owner who is responsible for the statements about these components. So they can, and this means we have still always an organization which is responsible for certain components or subcomponents. So they are capable to apply certain DIDs with the typical mechanism. When it comes to more, as is mentioned, manufacturing X, the operational environments, which are independent from DPPs, at least there's not a continuous operational dependencies to DPPs. But if you want to outline certain data services or reference data services to certain IoT devices, then it comes to this question: how can we apply DIDs into such Internet of Things environments? And even software processes might have a DID because they are owning a certain piece of the process stack. And whoever is liable or whoever is in the controller for the software piece, there must be a relationship and it must be identifiable.
Absolutely.
Therefore, I think we need to discuss also how to apply DIDs into these into such scenarios up to shop floor level. And these are the level of discussions we have, for example, in the platform industry 4.0 again, how to find an appropriate replacement of former well-known X509 certificates versus DIDs, how to bridge it, which is, of course, a more lengthy discussion. I'm really keen to see how it will evolve during the next HMI fair. Such discussions are on the way, and what are the future commitments of the industry players to follow this paradigm change, because it is we need to bridge such concepts at a certain level. But the direction is very clear. If you don't go into this direction of this W3C standards out of the Web3 space, we will not see the advancements we would like to see in terms of build such trustworthy ecosystems in a distributed way.
That was a very nice sentence. I guess we have to make a quote out of that last one. I think it's very important and meaningful sentence, because we think in the same direction. So summarizing with Gaia-X, we do have a platform, and I mean, we're focused on DPP here, on the digital product passport, where we can exchange trusted data between the supply chain actors. We can keep privacy and business confidentiality. We keep control over the data that come from a manufacturer about a product, and so forth. So we have a lot of things with this technology out of the box that we need to implement a digital product passport, just as a summary maybe from my side. And maybe what is important to the listeners, because there probably are supply chain actors in the listener community, is what investment do I have to make to participate at the Gaia-X ecosystem? Can you say a few words about that? If I want to share my data now or get data from others in my segment, what's the investment for me as a company?
Well, first of all, we need to understand that Gaia-X is not a product or something you can consume as it is. It is a conceptual approach to address certain challenges. And if I look, for example, the question how to implement the Supply Chain Act or how to achieve ESG compliance and all these things. So these are the business questions. And I would say it is not easy to describe appropriate solution patterns for such high-level objectives out of the box. Because when we talk about the goal to remove the plastic waste from the oceans, we cannot simply revert millions of wrong decisions in the past by some regulation and technology. So, and on the other side, we must act as fast as possible to address the biggest challenge, which is the climate change. So we need to overcome the thinking and behavior of the last century and still the last 2 decades and work in a collaborative way. So this is one of the conceptual ideas of Gaia-X, to build a kind of direction how to overcome these challenges and to address a multitude of problems which we are clearly identified, latest by the COVID constraints and other situations like single resource constraints in terms of gas and all these things. And I would say, coming back to the Supply Chain Act, it is one of the multiple initiatives by regulators to change the priorities. And I'm very convinced that digital services and smart technologies can help a lot to achieve such goals, which brings us back to your initial question, what can we do? In the first place, identify your key challenges and problems, try to match them with the conceptual approach of Gaia-X, and then contribute how to make things better than we did before. And to make it easier, we made a set of functional components, the Gaia-X Federation services. And probably all those who joined such discussions where we have fancy slides with 40 buzzwords and things are so easy, you just have to do this and this. Most people should really understand there's a huge gap between what you show in PowerPoint and how to bring it into operational level. And at least about it is 20% concept and 80% implementation, which is the real burden. And therefore, all these things we recently discussed in terms of how to deal with DITs, how to deal with verification mechanism, how to deal with complex object descriptions, serialization, knowledge graphs, smart contracting, compliance assessment. So we built a set of core services to use them, and this as open source, Apache license 2. So everyone can take it. And this is one of the core ideas where it took also some time to convince the large players to adopt this concept, because when they come together in the first time, they always try to introduce their existing IP into the conceptual level, which is a no-go, because you need a common understanding about the core stack, about the core technology. This should be open source without any constraints. And then on top of it, you can build your own individual or protected business model. or service model or whatever. So we need to understand that the adoption of such concepts requires a reasonable portion of open source components, which are transparent for everyone, which really interlinks the core standards to keep this promise of interoperability, crossover domains or federations. And then from the other side, you have to identify your business challenges like CatenaX did. They have identified the challenges. Now they start the adoption, which are very close to the Gaia-X conceptual approaches, and they are using similar technologies. Probably not all of them, but conceptual, it is very close together. And from time to time, I think we will get a better level of harmonization, cross over all these ideas of ecosystems. And just if you want to work directly into the specification level of Gaia-X, you need to step into the Gaia-X Association, which is a non-for-profit association in Brussels. If you want to contribute on the implementation level, then you can join the open source initiatives. One of them is, for example, Eclipse, where we have the Eclipse data space components. And within this quarter, we will also donate and promote our federation services into Eclipse governance. Then we have the hubs, for example, in Germany, the Gaia-X hub, which is more the meeting point for all the domains to discuss what do we need to address our problems. And then we have these lighthouse projects like CatenaX, who are really showcasing the implementation. And just yesterday, there was the announcement that the operational company of CatenaX has been established. So they started with the association to describe the governance, and now they move into the operational level, and they are very close to do the first onboarding of suppliers for data exchange. So now it's a time where all these concepts are really getting into operation.
And coming together.
It was a long journey, but now we are really able to showcase how it works. And now it's on CatenaX to provide the response. Well, we could solve some of our mission statements, probably not all of them. But at the end of the day, we need the evidence of the market that they say, if I go into this direction, things are getting better.
Yeah.
This is something we can expect during this year, for sure.
That's already a nice lookout of what's going to happen. And I also saw that even politics are picking up the topic. And I saw Gaia-X and the digital product passport in kind of one statement from the Conservative Party this week. So I think also politics is understanding the potential of the technology and also gives them a push and helps to implement this. Do you see any other pickup of the political Germany or political Europe where the concepts are adopted and further pushed?
Well, one of the key activities besides Gaia-X is, of course, the evolution of data spaces, which is more, and there are a lot of tenders out there, and the EU Commission is really promoting this, especially for the energy sector, for example. We need to understand that due to the lack of information in the energy sector, well, at least Germany had to purchase a lot of energy on highest prices because they had no clear understanding who is going to consume what type of energy at which point, at which time. And this lack of information, I think it costs already around 60 billion euro for Germany. So everyone understood we need more data, we need more information, and we need more orchestration of several entities to react on certain circumstances. And I think this is a learning curve we had already. And on the other side, within Gaia-X, we have already a lot of key stakeholders engaged and who are representing the majority of the industry. And as you said, when we now introduce a digital product path, we are targeting the same people, the same companies. So it makes sense to bring them into the same discussion level, which doesn't mean that Gaia-X and EPP is not directly related, but I explained already from the core technology point of view, there are so much similarities that it makes sense. Consider a solution stack which adopts the Gaia-X principles to some extent. And this will really hopefully help us to enhance Europe. And I would like to see that Europe is better prepared to be part of the digital value chain, because this is one of the key constraints we are seeing right now.
Yes.
Do we want to be consumer, or do we want to be in the driver's seat? And if we want to be in the driver's seat, then we have to do much more than we did in the past 20 years.
Absolutely.
But there's a chance, and I think especially our production competencies and our regulation and all these good things we have in place in Europe will help us to find our own way. And we just have very intense exchange with Japan, with South Korea, with Brazil, with Mexico. They are facing the same challenges for their economy. They would like to harmonize such concepts, and hopefully this will really make the impact and bring us ahead the wave, at least in this area.
Thank you, Andreas, for really putting all those important aspects of the technology that you're actually driving together. We see how important digitization and Gaia-X in particular can be, and what important role it can play for solving a lot of topics and problems that we have today. So thank you so much for this interview. Thank you for all the aspects that you explained a little bit further for our listener. Thanks again for being here, Andreas.
Thanks, Susanne. And the journey is still there, and a set of challenges in front of us, but
we're here to tackle them, aren't we?
We are here to tackle them and to proceed and to move forward. It is failure is not an option.
Thank you. That's a good new statement. Thank you, Andreas, and goodbye.